and shelter. Until you get food, clothing, and shelter, you will never get the attention of the masses. What made Marcus Garvey so successful? What made the Honorable Elijah Muhammad so successful? What made the Black Panther Party so successful? Now you're looking at three different ideologies. Mr. Garvey's Pan-Africanism, Elijah Muhammad's Black religious nationalism, the Black socialism of the Black Panther Party. Ideologically, they were different, but all three of them did one thing: provided for food, clothing, shelter, jobs, education, medical care. Every last one of those institutions attempted to build some sort of an independent functioning community with services. We ain't doing that today. We ain't doing that today. And that's why we don't have their attention. They say, why does the church continue to control black people when all they do is sell Jesus and collect money? Why? Because the church does have some services. It ain't sufficient, but they got more than the conscious organizations. The problem with the conscious organizations is all we do is run our damn mouth, but nobody's building. You follow me? We got 1,000,001 books at the bookstore. We got a book for every problem, but the problems are still here. See, we have been content with the information. The information is not enough. It is information plus action.
That our schools teach our children the truth, okay? And we could do that because we pay for the schools. Public education is not free in that way. We pay for it every day, every time we pay taxes, every time we purchase things, every time we buy insurance, whatever it is. We're supporting all these things. And we have more say-so there, but it's difficult to get us to come out to the schools. And the frustration of having children who are out of control is so high that the mothers are glad to send a child off to school and try to give that responsibility to somebody else instead of us taking that responsibility on ourselves.
Because of the educational system, we are taught not to trust. And some people want to say it's the Willie Lynch syndrome. You know what I mean? Some people say that. But it's the trust factor with us. We don't look at each other as family anymore because we have been Europeanized, a lot of us, or Westernized.
This gives us the impetus to be able to claim who we are as a people. And for us now to go into our schools and teach our children, because if we don't teach them this, look, if I were them, I wouldn't teach this. I'm telling you straight up right now. I would not teach African children to have power over themselves. If they have power over themselves, they don't have to ask you for a job. They don't have to depend on you for a job. They'll make their job.
Black businesses are very important because the African American people, black people in America are taught to just have good jobs, go to school and get a good job. Black people in America are not taught to start black businesses. Just like with colleges, most black colleges, if you notice, they'll have the initials A&M, Alabama A&M, North Carolina A&T. It's A&M and A&T, and that's agricultural and mechanical, agricultural and technology. So those terms were used for black schools because black schools were training vehicles to get black people into the Industrial Revolution. It was trying to teach them how to be very good employees. We have to get out of that mindset of being good employees and learn how to take pride in being good business owners. We have to learn how to be more entrepreneurial.
The solutions is that we need to stop begging the job God to find work for us. The solution is that if black people are going to have work in America again, they're going to have to bring back light manufacturing. We're going to have to create something. We're going to have to make something. And I'm telling you that there are other nations that would help us to do that because they want to see some real money come out of America instead of this fake dollar that's getting ready to go into a complete inflation.
The solution is independence. Independent schools. Anything we need for our survival, we must control. Independent farms, independent agriculture, independent airlines, independent shipping.
We are the only people that don't invest in each other. We used to, but we don't do that anymore. So if you watch Asians, they always put money up for Toyota. Watch them. You see the Chinese right now, they have bus companies. They invest. This is what they do. The Italians do the same thing. We are the only ones that don't do that.
And I'm encouraging black folk to set up consultant firms to teach Europeans how to survive in a depressed, inflated society. Because who better to teach them how to take a potato and feed the community potato soup? Who better than grandma that used to take a couple chicken wings and could feed the whole family? We have lived with an inflated dollar all of our life in America. We have lived in a depression all of our life in America. And yet, as Dr. Maya Angelou says, still we rise. We're still able to smile. We're still able to relate to each other. That's a powerful thing. They need to learn this.
After we saw Dr. King and after we saw Malcolm get assassinated, Patrice Lumumba, Medgar Evers, the 60s, they tried to take care of everybody they could find. that put so much fear in subsequent black leadership that they are still cowards to this day. Which is why I say respectfully, there's not one of them who I could point a young black boy to and say, you know what, you should be like him when you grow up. Not one of them. Because the average black leader today is really not a black leader. He is a deal broker. The job of the black leader is to broker power deals between the structure and the black masses. Let me give you an example. A riot's about to kick out outside. Cops beat down a brother. Brother's about to go and tear up the police district. The leader should do what? Come in, organize it, say, hold on, brothers, before we go there, there's another way we can handle this thing. Let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. In other words, you organize the energy, you redirect it into a direction that is most likely to bring the desired result. They don't do that. They don't redirect the energy. You know what they do? They dissipate the energy. Go back home. Let the law prevail. Let's settle it on election day. You follow me? Let's get some placards and march around the police district. Let's do something that don't mean a damn thing to white folks. This is what they do. Deal brokers. That's all they do. They send them in to dissipate the energy and send you home, and you never hear about the incident again.
People who march are powerless. You don't march for what you want, you take what you want. Everybody knows that. The mafia knows that. You go and you take what you want. You take what you want, you establish your superiority and your seniority over that, and that's yours. You don't go marching for somebody to give you anything. That is insane and inane. We don't do that anymore. That's one thing we could at least learn. Don't go marching for a damn thing anymore. Take what you know is yours. Work towards becoming better and understanding how your adversary works. Work towards understanding the tactics of your adversary. Read The Art of War. And read all things having to do with tactics, mental, psychological, as well as physical, as well as military. Understand the way that chess is played. Teach your children how to play chess because it has them working both sides of their brain.
Know thyself. We have to know our history. We have to study. We have to study chemistry and physics and math. We have to learn how to write and read. We have to recapture our history. We have to make Medu-Neter, or what we call hieroglyphs, the classical African language. We have to make Kiswahili the practical spoken language. So if I go to Brazil and there's a brother that speaks Portuguese or a sister that speaks Portuguese, I speak English, we should be able to speak Kiswahili to each other. If I go to Holland, there's a brother or sister that speaks Dutch, I speak English. We should be able to speak to each other in Kiswahili.
Understanding the game and self-respect, meaning, what's in my interest. It's not about hating anybody. It's what's in my interest. Like my ultimate goal objective is not hating white people, not wanting to do to white people what they have done to black and other people of color, but to replace the system of racism, white supremacy, with a system of justice so that there can be peace on the planet.
And to understand that we can do in the class what Michael Jordan did on the basketball court, what the Williams sisters did on the tennis court, and what our brother Tiger did on the golf course. We can rewrite the game. We can make it so that they can't test us because they're not intelligent enough to ask the kind of questions that we would answer. This is how deep we are. And they know this. And like I say, this has been my theme. If I were them, I would do the same thing. How can I let you out? What's going to happen to me when you find out who you are? I will be destroyed.
The one thing that we could say about African peoples is that we left evidence of ourselves all over this planet. And that's the problem with European scientists. The deeper they dig, the blacker the planet gets. And what we have been made to see now is this infusion of European, I guess, philosophies about what the past was, and no one else on TV is actually giving us evidence of what we were, who we were, but Europeans.
Every person has the right to know their ancestral history. Every person, no matter where they are in the world.
Most of world history, 90% of world history is African history. And even that 10%, Africa is extraordinarily involved in making it what it is.
You won't find a painting, you won't find a statue, you won't find a monument anywhere prior to 1500 that isn't Africoid in some way, shape, or form.
Black folk don't have a problem. White folk got a problem. Black folk problem is that white folk got a problem. The real problem we have is white supremacy. The real problem we have is the perception people have of us.
From 1790 up until 1965, your immigration laws play almost zero for black folk. You had a zero immigration law for black folk because you're destined to be a planned minority. You know what a minority means? That means a loser. It means you're a loser.
It's very difficult to control a group of people militarily because eventually the money will run out if you try to control a group of people militarily. And also the possibility of them raising up against you is always imminent. So it's best to control a people psychologically.
When you conquer a people, you have two choices. One, you have to commit an act of genocide. Either you wipe them out completely, complete act of genocide so that you can take over the resources of the land. Or you kill the warrior class of these people and you enslave the children and the elderly. This is just war history. In our situation, meaning those that live in the United States, the choice was enslavement, not genocide. That means that from a child, you have to be taught that everything about you is wrong. Everything about who you were and where you came from is wrong. And I mean wrong, immoral and illegal.
Melanin is a neurochemical that is produced in part through the pituitary and the pineal gland. They both play a central role in the production of melanin, which is ultimately responsible for the color that we have in our skin. Now, historically, it had always been thought that melanin played a significant role in the intellectual propensity of African people. For example, when you study some of the Greek writings on melanin or the color of Africans, many of the Greek philosophers believed
And the concept of melanin is, it is black in its nature. And we find it in the cosmos, we find it in the heavens, we find it in water, we find it in land, we find it in everything that exists.
The sperm of the male and the egg of the woman, they're both layered with melanin. So that when the sperm penetrates the egg, there is a melanin explosion. And that melanin helps to formulate the fetus within that egg, and that fetus is literally coated with a melanin substance. And that melanin substance then goes on to form the brain and the central nervous system. So every human being begins with a melanin explosion.
Melanin is an intelligence. It's an intelligence because it is the dynamic, the primary dynamic in every part of the cell. It's a primary dynamic in the core of the human being as well as to the surface of the human being. Its intelligence is responsible for the forming of the nervous system. Every part of the nervous system has these little black dots all through it, which essentially carry information.
So melanin, from a physical standpoint, is that substance that accounts for what black people refer to as soul. We move differently, we walk differently, we talk differently because we have access to a different form of energy than other folk.
Not only is melanin a pigment, which is so obvious, but melanin as an intelligence is a communications module that essentially broadcasts as well as receives information by way of light and sound frequency signatures.
Scholars and scientists have been having conferences about melanin, to my awareness, at least since the 1920s.
The pineal glands of most of our white brothers and sisters are calcified, and so they make less melanin. And that comes from the historical relationship to what we call the Permian Ice Age, that 10,000 years of glacial freezing that happened in Europe after the Africans who were the Grimaldi moved up there. And so it became the survival of the fittest. Who was able to adapt could survive. Who wasn't able to adapt died. So those people who were able to get rid of their melanin was able to survive. Those who could not get rid of the melanin, they died.
These scientists said that the pineal gland, they refer to the pineal gland as a vestigial organ. That is a calcified gland within the body that served no purpose, as if the creator would create something that you didn't need. And it was only after the Vietnam War, in the late 60s and early 70s, that they began to rewrite their interpretation of the pineal gland. The reason for that was that a large number of African Americans fought and died during the Vietnam War. And whenever a soldier dies, there's an autopsy that's performed before their body is sent back to Dover Air Force Base. And what they discovered, what these physicians discovered, is that when they performed the autopsies, the 75 to 80% of the African American soldiers had a large functioning pineal gland. The pineal gland is normally about the size of your thumb. So it was not a vestigial organ in 70 to 80% of African Americans, but it is a calcified organ in 75 to 80% of people with European ancestry. So they began to reevaluate the pineal gland. They began to reevaluate melanin.
I think if you talk to Dr. Welsing, she'll tell you this is about genetic annihilation or genetic survival, okay? It's about genetics. Who will survive America? Who will survive the world? Whose genetics will hold up? What is going to be the genetic, or the genotype that's on the planet 1,000 years from now? Will it be white? Will it be brown? Will it be black? And so you find that the elements of the human family that find themselves suffering from the ecology that we're in, they're struggling to survive and to be able to maintain themselves. All nations, European nations and America, white Americans, are at minus birth rate right now. Not zero birth rate, where they're keeping up with the natural death. They're at minus birth rate. And so that's why there's so much emphasis on artificial birth creation and other ways to have babies and make babies that are beyond the normal. And you'll also find that this adopting black babies, the Haiti thing, getting the children out of Central African Republic and Chad, adopting Filipino babies, Latino babies by the white community on such a high level, it is to infuse their gene pool with the melanin.
A few years ago, the president of Chad, a man by the name of Idris Deby, he had a group of French charity workers arrested after it was found out that they were kidnapping children from that area. Now, Deby accused them of stealing the children from their parents and planning to sell the children to pedophile rings up in Europe. He also accused them of possibly planning to kill the children to sell their organs. Now, this is the president of Chad saying this, and this was a big scandal with the Chadian government and the French government. So we need to understand everything that's going on with people going into Africa trying to get these children up out of here. There's a war being waged on melanated people, and melanated people, people of color, should realize that a war is going on. A lot of melanated people do not realize that this war is going on, and this war is going on an educational front. There's a spiritual warfare, there's a medical warfare, there's a prison industrial warfare, and there's an economic warfare being imposed on people of color, especially in America. About them is negative. What you have to do is tell them where they're from is a negative place, and this is what they've done to black people. They say, black people, you're negative, you're bad, because Africa is negative and Africa is bad. So the images that we have of Africa, we always see the underbelly, we always see the propaganda, we always see the warfare, but they never show the other side.
One of the things that I've discovered about conquered people is that most conquered people have had their ancestral memory erased, and they only know what missionaries or enslavers have taught them, and usually it's negative.
There is good, there is bad, there is advancement, and there is a lack of advancement in all cultures. The problem is that this society tends to want to show you the extended belly of a baby in Ethiopia. It wants to show you the negativity of Africa.
People think Africa and Asia and Guatemala, Southern America, these places were all jungle. Jungle came after the invasions of European colonialism. Then the jungles came in because nobody was manning the land anymore.
Look at the map. Just this map tells you alone that the great majority of Africa is grassland. It shows you right here. It's grassland, no jungle. In fact, the Everglades, by proportion, there's more jungle in the Everglades than there is proportionately in Africa, and that's in Florida.
There's more jungle in Europe and in Asia than there is in Africa. Without a doubt, Africa has its wetlands, it has its greenery, some of the most beautiful animal kingdoms in the world. But most of Africa is not jungle. There's more jungle on the other continents than there is in Africa. In fact, you have vast greenlands in Africa, miles, tens of thousands of miles of nothing but flat, beautiful green land.
Whenever they show images of Africa, they like to show the hunter-gatherers, the bushmen, the brothers running around half-naked with sticks. And that really represents about 1% of the whole population of Africa. As a matter of fact, you have those same hunter-gatherer people up in Europe. There's a group of people called the Sami people who live just like that, who live in mud huts, and they live that hunter-gatherer experience. But you never see any kind of mention of them in the media. You only see the African Bushmen, but you never see the rest of the whole continent and see how people are really living over there. Whenever you look at old Tarzan movies, old cartoons from back in the 1920s and 30s, they would always show the cannibalistic African person dancing around in the jungle with a big pot, putting in missionaries, cooking them and eating them. And that's a major myth about Africa because there's no evidence of any kind of cannibalism going on in Africa.
There is
Europe big time. There's a lot of evidence showing the cannibalism that was going on in Europe. As a matter of fact, this whole vampire phenomenon that we have is rooted in the cannibalism that was going on in Europe in the Middle Ages. One of the most famous vampires, Dracula, Count Dracula, is really based on a real person named Vlad Dracula, who's also known as Vlad the Impaler. And there's a very famous portrait of Vlad the Impaler from around 1499, sometime in the 1400s, showing him and these people that he impaled on the stake. But they only show half of this portrait, because when you pan out of this portrait, you will see Vlad the Impaler literally at a dinner table eating the body parts. And I mean, he has like knife, fork, salt and pepper, like he's at Applebee's or Denny's or something.
You have to remember at the time, Isabella, or the queen at the time, put a bounty on slaves. And part of the edict that she sent out was anyone or any of the people that you catch who are cannibals, you can enslave them. So now everybody would say, okay, they were cannibals.
Another myth about Africa is that it's extremely violent. Whenever we see anything about Africa, especially movies and the news, we always see the African warlord. We always see the African rebels riding on trucks, the African rebels with rocket launchers and machine guns. So what they do, the Western media, they'll take footage of a war-torn area. And the footage might even be old. They'll get old footage and show war-torn areas of Africa. They did that with the Kony 2012 propaganda not too long ago. And they'll try to pretend that this is what all of Africa is like. But in reality, out of the top 10 countries around the world with the lowest violent crime rates, 6 of those countries are in Africa, like Senegal, Cameroon, Mali. A lot of people don't know that. In an attempt for Western powers and European historians to distance Africa from Egypt, because they try to pretend that Egypt and the rest of Africa is totally different. So what they did, they created something called the Sub-Saharan African, meaning that the Africans below the Sahara Desert were somehow disconnected from the Africans in the north. Africans have always interacted with each other all over Africa. Africans have always moved around Africa. Even the Sahara Desert, it was not always a desert, number one. Number two, the Nile River goes from North Africa right into Southern Africa. So if they wanted to go back and forth from North Africa to Southern Africa, they can just take the Nile River.
Now, one of the things we have to be concerned about is the concerted effort to take Egypt out of Africa. And so many times when people speak of Africa, they exclude Egypt. And I think, and many people I think would agree with me, many of my colleagues and contemporaries, they would say that excluding Egypt from Africa would be like taking Greece and Rome out of Europe. It's just a huge void.
The more south you go, the more African-centered you'll get. As you move more north, their attachment to those structures are just not there. There's a lot of reasons why that happens, just in terms of they know it's not them. They know it's not their mindset. They know that they want to exploit it, but they do not know it. It is not part of them. They are an invading force. For them to be in Egypt today is equivalent to Europeans claiming America of 3,000 years ago.
And they could care less about those temples because, number one, they didn't build them. And from an Islamic perspective, they really wouldn't like to see them in existence. The reason they're there is because they are a moneymaker for the Egyptian government. Let's be clear.
A lot of the Egyptians that are there in Egypt now, they're invaders. They came later on down the line. They're not the ancient Egyptians. They're not connected to the ancient Egyptians, and they know that. When they're over there, they don't respect the ancient monuments as their own. Like when you go to the mosque over there, they respect the mosque. They're not over there smoking cigarettes. They're not selling things in front of the mosque. But when you go to the pyramids and you go to the museums, you go to the Sphinx, people, they're out there hustling. They're out there trying to sell you things. They're smoking cigarettes. They're out there running scams. They're running game on you.
Right.
Can you see this picture? We know this picture?
Yes, but let me see that. What was that? Hold on.
Mr. Obama.
That's Barack Obama?
Obama was my father.
Barack Obama was your father?
Yeah, in the Panorama Place. That maybe later.
When the
white scientists go into the temples of Kemet to excavate and clean up the walls and temples and make them visitable and inhabitable, they are changing the color of the actual paintings of the Africans on the wall. There was an entire report that came out how the scientific excavators in the temples of Kemet were lightening up the images on the wall, the Medu Neter. So you have black images, and they're using chemicals that actually turn the black image tan.
Professor Smalls told me when he went to study over there, he said the reason why we over here in the West are so caught up with ancient Kemet is because the seeds of Kemet, after Kemet was destroyed, all were driven to the south and to the west of Africa. And during the time of the slave trade, the strangers were the ones that they gave up first. So the people who actually are the ones that were brought over here were the remnants from ancient Kemet. They too, the people of Mali and the people of these areas that you're seeing with the Dogon, they say that the Dogons themselves are the forgotten parts of those tribes that actually ended up or who were driven out of ancient Kemet.
The Dogon were a group of Africans from the West Coast who had in fact been able to achieve a degree of astrological superiority and dominance that we really don't see a contemporary for or precedent for other than what was achieved in Nile Valley civilization.
And people began to chase the Dogon to examine them because you couldn't figure out how these so-called primitive Africans would have knowledge of astronomy, particularly the white dwarf star Sirius B, that Western astronomy itself is only coming to grips with. And so the Dogon have developed a kind of, I almost said infamy in the world. In fact, there's even a book called The Sirius Mystery, and it's about how the Dogon, these primitive Africans, could have knowledge of a star system that's invisible to the naked eye. So the Dogon are black people in Mali with an astronomical lore.
Whenever we see people in Africa, we always see the AIDS-infested African babies, the African people. But what they do not talk about is the AIDS that's going on in Europe. Most people don't know that most of the new AIDS cases today are not in Africa. Most of the new AIDS cases today are coming out of Eastern Europe, out of Russia, the Ukraine, and there's an AIDS epidemic over there in that area, but you never hear about it in the media.
Nations are invaded at the end of their power. If you look at all of the great nations that rose, when nations are invaded, the nation itself is sick already. Only dying nations are invaded. Nations act like animals to each other. If the state is strong, which means it is in a constant state of war, it is continuously fending off what it doesn't want. And not war always shooting and killing. Commerce wars, trade wars, competitions, even sports. The state is always in a constant push off, and let in. We want this. Acquisition. We want that. We want that. We gonna take that. Give and take. When another state starts to get weak because its people are unskilled, becomes ignorant, betray the king or queen or the ruling class, or the ruling class becomes tyrant and the people can't control the people anymore, any of these things, you lose your resources, just your state starts to deteriorate. The minute your state starts to deteriorate, other states are looking at you. It ain't got nothing to do with we love you, we knew you, we know your family. As a matter of fact, we'll take you in. You go into exile and come on into our state. And come on in, but we taking your land, your resources. Why? Because you weak.
How can Africa be so poor and yet be materially so rich? It's real simple. The answer lies in the Structural Adjustment Programs, SAP, the Structural Adjustment Programs that are imposed on African nations by the International Monetary Fund of Washington, D.C., the World Bank of Washington, DC, and USAID. These three organizations come into Africa, loan money, and then charge an interest rate on that money that they know the African nations can never pay back, thusly re-enslaving the entire nation and, in fact, the entire continent.
I point out that when Spanish, English, Dutch explorers would go through, let's say, the Americas, there's a good example here for the African continent. Many of the places they arrived at were already abandoned. Our tribes leaders, our kings and queens, our priests, traveled the world. They were literate. They read and spoke many languages. They heard and knew. These guys are coming to take over the land. They got weird weapons, and this is what they're gonna do. They went back to their tribe, told everybody, gather up your stuff. We have to leave. There is an invading force coming. We have to go. So many tribes were warned. When this invading force came, many times they came and found the place deserted and just claimed it as their own.
Why was Muammar Gaddafi killed? Muammar Gaddafi was murdered because he, along with the other African heads of state, were about to bring into existence Africa's first central bank. They were erecting a central bank in Africa, which was going to do what? Back its money to the resources under the ground in Africa. Now, what would that have done to the global economic order? Remember, the United States dollar isn't backed on any natural resource. The British pound isn't backed on any natural resource. The Canadian dollar, the European Union, their currency isn't backed on any natural resource because Europe doesn't have a lot of natural resources. Africa does. So if they would have been successful in creating a central bank of Africa, coming up with a unitary currency, and then backing that currency to the material wealth under the soil, they would have bankrupted every other economic system in this world from America to Europe to China. That was revolution, and that's why Muammar Gaddafi had to be assassinated, because he was about to help the African heads of state eliminate modern slavery and neocolonialism from the continent.
One of the things that you find is that European culture begins to take off after the first civilized Europeans, the Greeks, make contact with Kemet, or Egypt.
Greeks themselves were not white people, and even today, you any Greek. I was in the military. I was stationed in Athens and Piraeus. We know we're cousins. Let's stop playing.
We still have black Greeks living in Greece right now to this day, and people pretend they don't know where they came from, but there are black Greek people living in Greece right now.
People of Ireland long before, and the people of Scotland long before the Romans came, were already African peoples. If you see a picture of a Scottish person, there's always somebody with like this real thick black hair, right? And this real thick black, what do you think they're trying to tell you?
You know, they came out with a report a few years ago saying that King Tut shared DNA with men up in Britain. And the thing is, the Egyptians went into Britain, particularly Scotland, later on down the line. As a matter of fact, Scotland is named after an Egyptian princess, Scotia. And many of the descendants of those Egyptians are there to this day, but they're now known as gypsies. And the term gypsy is just a variation of the word Egyptian.
Whites have long hair, blacks have short curly hair. What is the reason for that? Black's hair, your follicle, my follicle, is not round, it's flat, like a ribbon. So you know how Christmas you rub your hand on the ribbon and it curls up? Well, that's the way our hair do. White hair is like a soda straw, it's round, so it hangs. What is the purpose for that? All of the main arteries that take the messages and information from the brain to the rest of the body pass through the human neck. So if you're caught in an ice age, you've got to grow enough hair to shield the neck, to insulate the neck. Otherwise, you're gonna die. Same thing with the nostrils. When you're in the sun of Africa, you need these big nostrils we have because you got to cool the brain down. But if you're in Europe and all that ice, you don't want to cool the brain down. So you need a smaller nostril bridge so you can warm the air up that's coming in. These simple physical anthropological realities.
The Greeks lost their history, all of it. Okay, the Greeks lost all their history. You know who had their history?
Out of the Dark Ages.
It was the Romans that began to call the black people in Africa. Remember that day we didn't speak English. So if you don't speak English, you're not going to call yourself black, right? So if you don't speak a traditional African language or Portuguese or Spanish, you will not call yourself Negro. At that time, Spanish was not dominant, so there's no Negro, there's no Portuguese. At that time, English is not dominant, so there's no black. At that time, the Romans were the dominant force, and the Roman word for black persons was Moorish, coming from the Greek roots for black.
They occupied Portugal. They occupied parts of southern France.
Up until 1700s, all the medical books on surgery and general medicine in Europe was written in Arabic. Isn't that extraordinary? All of the major universities of Europe, where the physicians and the scientists and the teachers were all studying, was in Spain and Portugal, run by the Africans that the West call Moors. And the reason the West keep emphasizing them as Moors, they don't want you to see that this is the same African we got enslaved that gave us all the wealth of knowledge that allowed us to enslave you.
At this time in Europe, we're talking the early 8th century, most European kings and queens could neither read or write. The Moors built vast libraries. Anybody, irrespective of your religion, you could practice your religious faith, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, in relative freedom. We find Moors in the army of the Spanish Emperor Trajan. In fact, in Italy, you have what's called Trajan's Column, and you can see more clearly Moorish soldiers on horseback on that column. You can go to Rome and see it for yourself. You have at least one emperor in Rome of Moorish ancestry. His name is Macrinus. He's specifically described as a Moor. You have other high-ranking Moors in the Roman army.
The Moors were known for building castles all throughout Europe, and some of those same castles can actually be found around North Africa. They call them desert castles or kazirs, but they are castles all around Africa.
The heart and soul, the thought, the mind that built the castles came from Africans. And they went through Europe and they built these. They built them straight through Spain, straight through Portugal, going up into France, going up into other parts of the world.
The earliest examples of castle building I found in an area that is now known as Nubia. If you were to go to the Nubia Museum in Aswan, Egypt, you'll find a model of a castle complete with a moat, drawbridge, fortifications, all of the architectural elements that we associate with castles in any part of Europe existed in Africa as late as 1800 BC, before there was civilization in Europe.
The Moors are described in English literature or European literature as black as pitch, black as a crow, black as a raven, black as ink, nothing white about them but their teeth.
The monument that we know is Stonehenge. A European writer by the name of Gerald Massey said in one of his books that Stonehenge was built by an African man named Maurian. Now, this is from a European writer, because a lot of times when black historians say something like this, it's written off as being Afrocentric. But European writers and several other European writers say that African people built Stonehenge and other monuments up in Europe.
Only when the enslavement of Africans started to produce wealth for Europe that this notion of color racism began to become a reality. Most of the great saints of Europe are black. Almost every church in Europe have a black Madonna and child.
Saint Calogero was another patron saint of Italy. He was a black man, and there's black statues of this man all over Italy, and there's paintings of Saint Calogero all over Italy and Sicily. They worship this man in Sicily. They still have statues of many Moors up in Europe today. They have a statue of Saint Benedict that was made in the 1700s. There's another bust carving of Saint Gregory that's in a museum in Germany. So there's statues of Moors and African people all over Europe to this day that you can see, but you got to go to museums to see them. They're very quiet about them. You have to go over there, and also you have to learn about these things in different languages, because they keep that history hidden because they'll put it in another language. The Ivory Bangle lady was an African woman whose tomb they found up in the York area of Britain. Now, whenever they find African people in Britain, what they would normally do is just try to write them off as being slaves, or they might have been a slave. It's a possibility that they were slaves. But with the Ivory Bangle lady, they couldn't write her off as a slave because it showed that she had so much wealth, she could not have possibly been a slave. The way her tomb was made, it was made out of stone, which showed wealth. Inside the tomb, it had all types of artifacts and jewelry like ivory bangles and necklaces and bracelets on her wrists. And it showed that this woman was extremely wealthy. Johannes Morris was a 13th century high-ranking official in Italy. And there's a carving, a statue of him at a museum in Italy right now. And this statue of Johannes Morris shows his clearly African features, African nose, African lips, African hair.
Look at the countries that are falling. Almost by chronology, they're falling the same way they invaded Africa. Greece is falling, Italy is falling, Spain is falling, Persia is falling. And it's all because what goes around comes around. No hocus pocus, no mumbo jumbo, this is just the way it is. You shall reap what you sow. That's not a biblical term, that's a scientific term.
When you read the European philosophers, what did they say? They often said that Africa had two great civilizations, Egypt in the north and Asia in the south. The white man said this. So they often, in ancient times, Asia was considered a part of Africa or Africa's second civilization. They said that you go to Asia and it's nothing but a carbon copy of Africa because it was settled by the Africans.
A lot of people don't know that there are pyramids all over Asia, and there are pyramids in China. In Japan, they have an underwater pyramid that a lot of people don't know about, and you can go there now, and that's one of those ancient mysteries. But again, pyramids are all over the planet.
So in Asia today, you have pockets of black people. You have the Mani. You have in southern Thailand, you have a related group in northern Malaysia, sometimes called Sakai, S-E-K-A-I. You have the Andaman Islanders, and there are at least two groups. One group is called the Onge, O-N-G-E, or O-N-J-E, I think it's O-N-G-E, and another is called the Jawara, J-A-R-A-W-A. And then you have black populations in the Philippines, sometimes called Negritos, or Eta, or I think we should call them Acta, which just means the people. You have a tradition of a similar group in Taiwan. These are the diminutive Africoids. These are the small blacks, similar in many ways to the Twa or so-called Pygmies in Central Africa. These are very, very ancient people who left Africa perhaps 60, 70, maybe 100,000 years ago and became isolated.
The Padang people, that's a group of people in Asia, and the women have these rings that they wear on their necks. That's identical to an African tribe of women in East Africa who wear the same type of rings on their necks. So this just shows that the African-Asian connection is still there. They still carry on some of the African cultures and traditions in certain parts of Asia.
I once had a professor of mine working on my doctorate tell me that she went to Japan and they went into the mountains of Japan. Now, this isn't a conscious woman by most definitions, but she couldn't wait to come back and tell me this. She said, Umar, I was in Japan. We went up into the spiritual temples of Japan, and we sat down in one of the temples waiting for the priest to come out and teach us a little bit about what they believe and what they stand for. She said, Umar, they walked out of the temples and their skin was just as black as ours. They had gray afros because they were elders. Now, she said the phenotype looked like the modern Asian, but she said the skin was black and they had gray afros, hair standing up on top like Don King. And she said it totally overcame me. They sat down and they began to talk. And she said, I couldn't believe these were black men. They were Japanese, but they were black men.
When I went over to Indonesia, I went there at night and I would see billboards of very light-skinned Asian Indonesian people. And then when I went to my hotel, I would go and watch these movies and I would see these very, again, light-skinned, pale-skinned Indonesian Asian people. But the next day when I went out into the streets of Indonesia, everybody was either my color or darker. I didn't see one person who looked like these people that were on the billboards and on television. So they would pick and choose and get the whitest looking Asian people to promote in the media over there. And when I walked around Indonesia, I saw people like jet black, dark. I ran into a couple of people with afros. I saw one Asian brother, full-blooded Asian guy with an afro, and I had to stop him. I said, brother, where are you from? And the brother was like, I'm from here, right here in Indonesia. So that African presence, that African phenotype is still throughout Asia to this day.
Look at the Buddha's hair. No Chinese person's hair looked like that. The Buddha has knotty hair. Every time you see the Buddha, his hair is knotted. Just a thought.
There's a painting called the Nambam painting of the Portuguese when they first go over to Japan. And when you look at this painting, the painting was made in around sometime in the 1500s, and it was the first eyewitness account of what they saw. Many of the Asian people there were dark-skinned, and half the people who were supposed to be Portuguese were dark-skinned.
There's a tradition begun by a man named Alexander Francis Chamberlain, at least in April 1914, in a publication called the Journal of Race Development. And I can quote him almost exactly. And he says, and even in far-off Japan, we can find traces of the ancient Negro. For when the Japanese armies in the 8th century, now here I'm paraphrasing, when the Japanese armies in the 8th century were fighting their traditional enemy, the Ainu, they were led by a famous Negro general named Sakanoye Tomomiraro. And this man became the first shogun in Japanese history.
Also in Malaysia, when I went down to Malaysia,
supremacy and light skin supremacy, because even when you look at Asia, even when you go to East India, they practice racism. Why? Because all of these places were colonized by the European and their culture infected the people. So one of the things that they do is they also have a tendency to do what? Hide the darker brother.
as a matter of fact, there was an incident that happened with Miss Fiji. They had the Miss World competition, and they chose this woman to be Miss Fiji. And Miss Fiji has more Europeanized features, and the people of Fiji spoke out against her. they weren't really trying to hate on her, but they said, look, this woman doesn't represent us. She doesn't look like us. She doesn't have our nose. She doesn't have our hair. And we're very proud of what we look like, and we want somebody to represent us. Because, again, they were trying to use that Europeanized Miss Fiji to bring in tourism and not scare away tourists. But the people spoke out against her. And this just shows that many people around the world, they're proud of their Africoid features. One of the oldest groups of people to inhabit India were a group of black-skinned people called the Dravidians, or the Untouchables. Now, when people think about the history and the culture of India, they oftentimes think of Mahatma Gandhi. And many people give praises and accolades to Mahatma Gandhi because of Dr. Martin Luther King. But what many people do not know is that Gandhi had very racist views towards black people.
The truth behind Mahatma Gandhi. First of all, I'm reluctant to use the word Mahatma. Mahatma means great soul. And many of my Indian colleagues would say he wasn't even an ordinary soul, much less a great soul.
The late, great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. put that picture of Mahatma Gandhi up in his office and said that he got the operational technique for nonviolence from Mahatma Gandhi. It was somewhat premature for the ancestor, who's one of my favorites, but it was premature because now you automatically set the stage where African people would start looking to Mahatma Gandhi also. For example, last spring, last Black History Month, I was in Atlanta. I went to the Dr. Martin Luther King Shrine where he and Queen Mother Coretta are buried, and across the street is a museum. Outside the museum is a life-size statue of Mahatma Gandhi. I couldn't believe it. This is a museum dedicated to the honor of Dr. King. But there's no statue of Dr. King outside of a museum erected in his honor. Instead, you have a life-size statue of Mahatma Gandhi. So the message to the child is what? That it was really Mahatma Gandhi who's responsible for you coming through the civil rights struggle, not Dr. King. Now, had Dr. King knew Mahatma Gandhi's true racist thinking and ideology, I'm sure he would have thought otherwise. As a psychologist, you can never know what's really at the root of somebody's thinking. I would argue that we should never make a hero of any other people. Mahatma Gandhi turned his back on Africans. Even when he came back to India and began fighting, he refused to give support to the African emancipation movements. And on more than one occasion, he had made derogatory remarks about Africans. And we also know the Dravidians of India, the Africans of India who are oppressed, were oppressed, and have always been oppressed in India. There is no record anywhere of Mahatma Gandhi fighting against the oppression of Indians in India who were black, the so-called Dravidians. Why didn't he speak out for them? Why didn't he speak out for Africans who were fighting against colonialism? Why didn't Mahatma Gandhi help our brothers and sisters in South Africa? It's because he was a racist like the rest of them.